Hello everybody and welcome back to yet another video here for evolution. Today, what we're going to be discussing is the act of speciation, or how organisms change over time to become new species. Now this is going to be a bit longer of a note section than some of our previous ones, so hang in there, you'll be alright. Well, that's enough of me yapping, let's get started. So, speciation, by definition, is a theory that species can change over time to become different groups, and this can be due to isolation, mutations, or evolution. So as you can see here, if you go ahead and follow the dotted lines back, there was a common ancestor between all these birds. However, they look drastically different. And the same thing here. It's not that much of a stretch to say that there is probably a common ancestor between a leopard and a domestic cat. But if you go back even further, you could say that there was even a common ancestor between the two of those and a wolf. A cat and a dog having the same ancestor? Poppycock! However, I beg to differ. They all have similar body structures, bones, and development, so it's not really that much of a stretch. So a species, by definition, are groups of organisms that can successfully reproduce having viable offspring. So they mean a species can go ahead and reproduce, and their offspring can also reproduce. So for organisms to be considered the same species, they have to be able to have offspring that can also produce more offspring. We'll talk a bit more about that later. So speciation, like we said before, requires three things. Isolation, so organisms being removed from the population in some way, shape, or form. Mutations, so changes in the genetic code. And evolution, or organisms changing over time. The most common type of isolation is reproductive isolation. So speciation requires some variation of reproductive isolation. So if they cannot mate, they are considered different species. Or if they can mate and the offspring cannot survive, they are also considered different species. So reproductive isolation can have two different types or causes. Prezygotic isolation, which means that mating or fertilization is prevented from occurring. So the sperm never meets the egg, or the mating ritual never occurs to begin with. Or it could be postzygotic, so the zygote still forms, fertilization still happens, so a hybrid zygote would form, but it may die early, be weak, or sterile, meaning it cannot reproduce. So prezygotic isolation. The first type is geographical. Organisms are separated by habitat, for example, land and water, mountains and valleys, or trees and grass. So in this case, if you go ahead and take a look, it doesn't matter how much game these two squirrels go ahead and spit at each other. They can't reproduce. There's a canyon dividing them. So I guess if you really want to go ahead and have an easy way to remember this, with geographic, there is a mountain high enough, there is a valley low enough, there is a river wide enough to keep me from getting to you, babe. You're welcome. The second type is temporal, meaning they're separated by time. So for example, these could be mating seasons, like the American toad and the Fowler's toad. They do live in the same area, however, these two would not reproduce because they have different mating seasons, one in the spring and one in the fall. If you put them both in the same crate, they'd just be confused. Behavioral. There is a courtship dance or interaction that is required for mating to occur. So there's a mating song or dance. In these cases, we have three examples. We have albatrosses, which go ahead and do an elaborate dance, and if one person screws up, that's it. There's the jumping spider, specifically the peacock jumping spider, that the males perform an elaborate dance routine. And if the female likes it, the two will mate. If she doesn't like it, he'll get eaten. And finally, we have, I believe these are called frigate birds. So they have this big throat pouch they go ahead and inflate and then make a wonderful bird noise that attracts the females. I can't replicate that noise because I'm not a bird. Food for thought. Finally, mechanical. Physically, it just doesn't work. They cannot mechanically mate. Square peg, round hole. Sorry, bee, that is a flower. Not a bee. You cannot reproduce with that. So some hybrids. These are all different variations of organisms that can actually interbreed. However, they can't reproduce after that. The offspring are sterile. So in the top left, we have a mule, which is a horse and a donkey. Here, we have a zorse, or zebroid, if you want to call it that. It's the cross between a horse and a zebra. Here, we have a tigon, which is a male tiger and a female lion. Here, a lamel or a kama, which is a camel and an alpaca. Here, we have wolfins, which are crossed between a dolphin and an orca. And finally, one of the most popular ones is the liger. So the liger is a male lion and a female tiger. Now, once again, these are considered two different species because they cannot mate. They cannot reproduce afterwards. All of their offspring are sterile. Now, these are not actually hybrids. I just wanted to toss this in here because I thought they look cool. I mean, who doesn't want to go ahead and cross a great white shark and a seagull, or a shark and a penguin, or a squirrel and a Chilean rosehair tarantula, or a zebra and an ant, or a crocodile and a grizzly bear? That sounds like a great idea. So yeah, no. Mechanical isolation, it just doesn't work. Sorry. Now, finally, there are a few more things we have to discuss, namely natural selection methods. So how organisms can go ahead and become different species over time. The first of these methods is called gradualism. So there are small changes over a long period of time, resulting in different species. So if you go ahead and take a look here at letter A, this is what gradualism looks like. At one time, they had a common ancestor, but over time there were small gradual changes that occurred over each generation, resulting in two different species. Or you could have punctuated equilibrium. This is represented by letter B. Punctuated equilibrium is where a new species rapidly emerges from a previous species. So in this case, everything was fine, and then we had a branch. We had a new species that emerged from the ancestral line, and then later on, same deal. And these organisms then went ahead and continued to mate until they had their own species. So gradualism, small changes over time; punctuated equilibrium, rapid changes over a short period of time. Now, directional selection. In nature, organisms often go ahead and have their own way of working things out. Certain variations are better to have. So in this case, the first type is called directional selection. This is where one variation of a trait is the best to have, and as such will appear more in a population, while others will decrease in number. So if you take a look here on the right, in this case we have different variations. We have white, kind of a cornflower blue, and purple. In this case, purple was the best variation to have. So over time, the number of purple increased, whereas the number of lighter variations gradually decreased, with the white disappearing completely. Next is called a stabilizing selection. A stabilizing selection is where the average, or mean, the middle ground of a trait, is selected into the best to have. So in this case, the average trait is the best one to have in a population. Meanwhile, the number of extremes, in this case the white and the purple, decrease. So the average trait appears more in a population, while the two extremes decrease in number. In this case, with the blue being 100% completely dominant here and the white and purple being eliminated completely. Finally, a disruptive selection. A disruptive selection is where the extremes of both variations of a trait are the best to have. So it's great to either have one extreme variation or the other. It's very bad to have the average. So here, the extreme variations appear more, whereas the average variations appear less. So the number of purple and white would increase, whereas the number of blue disappeared. Finally, sometimes things don't work naturally. And this is called artificial selection. Artificial selection is where specific traits are picked to go ahead and breed. So in this case, humans select traits that are passed on. And the best example of this is dog breeding. So technically, by definition, even though there are various breeds of dogs, they're all the same species. Meaning that, yes, technically, you could cross a Chihuahua and a Great Dane. I'm not sure why you would do that, but you could. So there are a wide variety of different breeds, each one being bred for a specific purpose. Bloodhounds used for their scent, beagles for their hunting and fetching capabilities, Rhodesian Ridgebacks were bred to go ahead and fight lions. I'm not making this up. Anyway, I've taken up enough of your time today. We just hit a little over 10 minutes, so thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate it. Go ahead, and if you have any questions on this, please contact your instructor. They'll point you in the right direction. So until the next video, you all take care, and I'll see you next time.